What's going on, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians of all ages, Joker back again, once again, and today we're going to talk about the art of storytelling and how Destiny utilizes it. But this time, instead of narrowing down on a good or bad example of Destiny storytelling, I want to go on a journey. I want to weave you a story about storytelling. In fact, on the first pass of the script, before this intro was even added, I wrote 1,125 words before I even talked about how any of this was relevant to the storytelling of Destiny. Because the concepts that I'm going to talk about, once laid out, will make my point self-evident. So much so that only a quick comparison to Destiny's storytelling will be required for the entirety of this video to make sense. So, without further ado, grab a drink, grab a snack, sit back, relax, and let's dive right in.
What unites people? Armies? Gold? Flags? Stories. There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story.
At the end of Game of Thrones Season 8, many of us were infuriated by this excuse for Bran to become king of the Not-So-Seven Kingdoms. After all, this line of logic didn't hold true to the story that was on display for the better part of a decade, and certainly not the one that had been shown over the course of Season 8. A story that was in sharp decline after Season 5 and petered out catastrophically as it crossed the finish line. But there is truth to what is said here. Stories have power. If they didn't, nobody would have been mad at the end of Season 8. Stories have the power to bring us together, since the first human sauntered up to the next human and bragged about something they killed on a hunt that they had gone on. Stories turn into myths, stories turn into legend, stories explain everything around us. What we now consider myths and legends were systems of belief in religion in eons gone by. Every city, state, country, government, religion that has ever or will ever exist was built on the foundation of stories, both good and bad. Why is this? Well, to quote an article called The Science of Storytelling, What Listening to a Story Does to Our Brain by Leo Widrich. When listening to a story, according to researchers in Spain, not only are the language parts of our brain activated, but any other areas in our brain that we would use when experiencing the events of the story are too. If somebody tells us about how delicious certain foods were, our sensory cortex lights up. If it's about motion, our motor cortex gets active. Metaphors like the singer had a velvety voice and he had leathery hands rouses the sensory cortex. Then, the brains of the participants were scanned as they read sentences like, John grasped the object, and Pablo kicked the ball. The scans revealed activity in the motor cortex, which coordinates the body's movements. A story can put your whole brain to work, and yet, it gets better. When we tell stories to others that have helped us shape our thinking and way of life, we can have the same effect on them too. The brains of the person telling the story and listening to it can synchronize, says Uri Hassan from Princeton. The article goes on to state, when the woman spoke English and the volunteers understood her story, their brains synchronized. When she had activity in her insula, an emotional region of the brain, the listeners did too. When her frontal cortex lit up, theirs did too. By simply telling a story, the woman could plant ideas and thoughts and emotions into the listener's brain. Anything you've experienced, you can get others to experience the same, or at least get their brains to activate too. Evolution has wired our brains for storytelling. Now, all of this is interesting. We know that we can activate our brains better if we listen to stories. The still unanswered question is, why is that? Why does the format of a story where events unfold one after another have such a profound impact on our learning? The simple answer is this: we're wired that way. A story, if broken down into its simplest form, is a connection of cause and effect. That's exactly how we think. We think in narratives all day long. No matter if it's about buying groceries, whether we think about work or our spouses at home, we make up short stories in our head for every action and conversation. In fact, Jeremy Hasu found personal stories and gossip make up 65% of our conversations. Whenever we hear a story, we want to relate it to our existing experiences. In fact, this video is nothing more than a story, me framing the importance of storytelling and conveying an example that I'm sure has led more than a few of you to reflect on the type of stories you tell and are told. This is why one of the most powerful tools in advertising, politics, and religion is the testimonial. In this case, testimonial propaganda, where either a famous person or seemingly authoritative person recommends a product, service, and vouches for the quality of it. Right here would be an ironically great place for a Raid Shadow Legends ad, or a G Fuel ad, or a gaming monitors ad, or an electric ball trimmer ad. You get my point. You see testimonial propaganda all the time. The other type of testimonial is that of the converted or the true believer. You see this in both religion and politics a lot, where somebody testifies to the help that they have received from a political or religious leader in question, regardless of said political or religious leader's capability to deliver on any promises. There is a power and an allure that is rooted in the mob mentality when a leader is able to parade out voice after voice after voice, telling stories about how that leader has helped them. Stories are also why humans are so quick to label others to compartmentalize them into categories. Labels are just really short stories. People call Bife and Malin Games Destiny lore masters. That title tells a story. In the inverse, people call me a Destiny hater, and that tells another story. This is also the inevitable issue with labels and compartmentalized titles. It can strip away complexity and nuance, and in its worst form, it's used to other, to create in-group and out-group dynamics. Think anything like religion, politics, race, gender, creed, to your favorite sports team, to hunter, warlock, or titan. This is, for better or worse, something that humans naturally do. To abuse an example, I get called a Destiny hater by people with small minds who don't want to think about their entertainment, regardless of the fact that, again, for example, Malin Games might have many of the same issues with the current state of Destiny that I do, but because he doesn't openly talk about them the same way that I do, because that's just not the content he's interested in making, or maybe it's outside his wheelhouse, or maybe it's something that his audience wouldn't react well with, he's not labeled the Destiny hater because he doesn't talk about it, even though we may have the same view. Now, to be 150% clear, before anybody thinks that I'm putting words in Malin Games' mouth, I have no idea what he thinks about the game. I'm just using him as an example. So, what does these 1,125 words before I've ad-libbed a bunch have to do with Destiny storytelling? Well, it all comes down to a fairly simple set of concepts. First and foremost, a good story told poorly is a bad story. This can take many different forms, but one fantastic example of this that I stumbled upon when I was trying to figure out who originally said that was provided by Empty Minded over on Our Fantasy. Quote, "Not a book, but I think the Star Wars prequels are a good example. The core story of a promising, albeit troubled young Jedi slowly losing his faith in a stagnant, decaying, complacent Paladin order as he struggles with human emotions he's supposed to repress seems perfect for a literary tragedy. There's a really awesome story in there, buried under bad pacing and dialogue writing." Another great example of this comes from the aforementioned Game of Thrones Season 8. There's a great story in there. Somewhere, well, at least the pieces exist. A war with a magical army of ice zombies for the dawn, or an invading dragon queen acclimating to people and customs she is grossly unprepared for, all while trust between her and her advisors fade as she continues to lose her grip on power and her army is slaughtered in battle after battle that she's not invested in. And then she loses her children, the dragons. And then in the 11th hour, when she's lost so much, the last bastion of hope that she had, the lover that was supposed to be there for her, not only pulls away, further isolating her, but turns out to be the rightful king. And her nephew. Which isn't a problem for her because, you know what? Incest is wincest to Targaryens, but not to Starks, and Jon was raised as a Stark. And once all of this information is known to everybody around her, they start plotting to put Jon on the throne instead. Take all of this stress and mix it with a genetic predisposition for insanity that, historically speaking, can be triggered at the flip of a coin, and you have the recipe for the Mad Queen and a compelling story. The same goes for Jon, who is basically a messiah-like fire zombie king figure who's brought back to fight the ice zombie king figure. All the while, at least in the show, dealing with the fact that there's nothing after death but darkness, and dealing with the fact that he was betrayed by the men he called brothers. Then he moves on to become King of the North, falls in love with the invading Dragon Queen, only to find out that everything he knows about himself was a lie, and that he is actually the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms, putting him in direct opposition to the invading Dragon Queen, who is also his biological aunt, and Starks are not all about that incest being wincest. His story ultimately culminates in the Dragon Queen going insane, burning down a city, and him being forced to kill the woman he loves before she can do it to the rest of the world. See, there are some really great plot ideas there, some interesting character arcs that could be explored, but all of this was butchered up and crammed into one season when realistically it should have been conveyed over 3. The second concept to this series of concepts that I'm talking about is that a bad story told excellently can be an excellent story. This is a little harder to give examples for because a good story is a good story, but we see it all the time. The original Star Wars is little more than a series of hero's journey tropes strung together in a sci-fi setting that hinges on execution. We're now a couple thousand words in, and you might be wondering what any of this has to do with Destiny. I don't think it's any secret to anyone that the in-game storytelling of Destiny has been far more miss than it has been hit. I mean, is that even remotely controversial? Am I a Destiny hater for pointing this out? At the start of Season of Arrivals, when I made my first impressions video, I had the pleasure of listening to all the dialogue for all the story beats in basically one setting. This combined with reading the lore gave me hope for the story of Destiny going forward. Hope that I still have. The problem is, there's getting to experience the story in one sitting and enjoying it, then there's experiencing the story over 13 weeks, or not at all, when a game-breaking glitch can actively lock you out of story progression. I am hitting A as hard as I can. But hey, Bungie, tell me more about how ghost shells that affect Eververse and loot farms are a top priority when this glitch has been an issue since day 1 of this season. But I digress. As I was saying, the story of Season of the Arrivals takes place over the course of 13 weeks, give or take, and sometimes the amount of story that you receive can be tantamount to little more than a sentence.
This is a simple message. Eggshell. The term carries all the impermanence and fragility you would expect. The darkness sees the traveler as something keeping us isolated from the outside world. It is a barrier we are meant to outgrow and break through.
For as much as we talk about how Destiny could improve on this channel, seeing the way that this amazing story has been told is quite possibly the first thing in a really, really long time to actually frustrate me about the game. When Bungie fucks up some gameplay loop, or reuses content for the 900th and 99,000th time, is anybody really surprised? These things have happened so often that, honestly, it's just another day in Destiny. But when Bungie actually knocks something out of the park, and the execution is just so piss poor that it ruins it, and it all comes down to the format it was released in, it is actually infuriating. Whomever's idea it was to tell this story this way was categorically wrong. I'm not even going to waste the time to come up with some clever insult for them. They were just wrong. The story of Season of the Arrivals is realistically the victim of the Season Pass model, in my opinion. If Bungie had put in the time and effort to tell the story in a Forsaken style expansion or a Warmind style expansion, then this story could have been fucking spectacular. We would have had an amazing DLC. Instead, the story is piecemealed out week after week after week, and the story loses its weight. It loses its gravitas. It doesn't seem that important because the game doesn't treat it like it's important. It's just kind of a thing that's kind of happening off in the background, that's maybe slightly relevant. At least that's the way the game treats it. Something happens on Tuesday, and then the game treats it like nothing's going on for the rest of the week. There's no point in it. Go play Crucible. Go do Heroes of Solstice. Go play old raids, go play old strikes, go do anything else but deal with the story. Storytelling, good storytelling, is about emotion. It's about knowing how to convey information, when you should have your highs, when you should have your lows, and what voice should be used. But singularly, the most important thing about storytelling is pacing. Like I explained with Game of Thrones, and like I'm explaining with Destiny. If you rush too quickly to the end, or take too much time to get there, it doesn't matter how good your story's concept is, your pacing has ruined your story. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Remember to like, but only if you did, subscribe for more, and feel free to donate to my Patreon if you are feeling particularly generous. But above all else, stay frosty.